name is Betty Lou Berg, Mueller now, and I was born at the foot of the dam. My grandfather built the house, it's still there. And I lived there until I was 8. Mother hated it, so they moved to town. It was beautiful. It's an interesting thing, and I'll add it because we sold it in 1943 for $1,200, 379 acres. Coke just sold it for $7.1 million. So, maybe we made a mistake. But the house is still standing, my grandfather built. And they actually settled on the Muddy in foot of Lee Creek in 1897. He homesteaded. And then they bought Bardeen. When Judge Bardeen died, Bardeen no longer exists. It was between Somerset and the dam. And he bought that. They had a sawmill, a post office, a school, a store. And then in 1916 they bought what you would have known as the Forks or Crystal Meadows, and now it's, I don't know what he calls it now. They sold it to someone else. My grandmother moved to Paonia in 1930, and Mother and Daddy moved to the ranch. That's the year they got married. And then we lived there till I was 8, and then we moved to Paonia. My grandmother's history is interesting because she was born to royalty in Germany, and she married my grandfather, who was a commoner. So she was disowned and she was excommunicated. Of course, the relatives are all buried in the cathedral in Cologne. And so my grandfather stayed there for 2 years, and they made his life miserable. They wanted to make sure he couldn't have a job, and because they wanted her to return to the fold. And she's been a power of strength all my life, because I can't imagine. She spent the weekends in a castle. She had maids. She went to finishing school. She spoke only French and German. And she came here and she never complained to us, ever, ever. And she was in her 90s when she died. I spent every Friday night with her because she had a clock that ticked, and I liked that clock. But, she never complained. And we drive up to Lee Creek where the homestead was, and I think, my God, she was 14 miles from Somerset. So how she survived, I don't know, and she never mentioned it. They took in boarders when they were at the Forks, and because everybody that came down for the Muddy had to stay there all night because they couldn't move on until the next day. So, and I don't even know how she managed. If anything gets rough for me, I think Grandma. It's funny, I put the ponds in the front yard, and I had American Horticulture Society how to build a pond. And they were preformed ponds anyway, and I thought, oh, an idiot could do this. This is so easy with the book, Well, I started at 7:30 in the morning, at 1 in the afternoon. I flipped the ponds over, and you guys, they were freeform. They were upside down when I dug the hole, but when you turn them over, they don't fit anymore. And I'm telling you this because I sat there and cried my eyes out, and I thought, what would Grandma say? And she would have said, Val, do it over. So I did. But she was a power of strength. She really was. And of course, I found out there were only 5 families up the Anthracite. So of course, they made the news that 1904, and I reviewed all the papers, which you probably remember. And they made the paper every week, so I found out tons of things about my family I didn't know, because Grandma never said anything. And being a kid, I never asked. They came on a ship, and they went to Pennsylvania for 2 years, and his dad was awarded some high medal in Germany, my cousin has it. And he was an officer, of course, when she met him. But they lived in Pennsylvania. She had 2 more children immediately. And they were there 2 years. They came here with the friends they came across the ocean with, but we called them Uncle and Tante, the aunt and uncle. They settled in Frederick, which is right by Denver, and they came over here. And, you know, we've wondered forever why, because he was raised in a city in Germany. Why on earth would they homestead Lee Creek? If you know where it is, it's up on top of McClure, before you get to the top. So, I have no idea. I wish I knew. We've pondered and pondered over why didn't we ever ask, but, you know, when I talked to my grandmother, it was about new boys in school or girls or friends or what, you know. I never thought to ask. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. He was the foreman of the construction crew that built Kevlar Pass, and that's how he was killed. But that was 1928. They bought Bardeen, and they didn't do anything unique at Bardeen. They just had the post office and the store and the schoolhouse. And then after they sold Bardeen, that was the end of Bardeen. I do have pictures of Bardeen. And there was a path, you guys, not as about that wide, that they had the horses on and the buggies. But everybody, then when they bought the Forks, everybody who came down from the Muddy, like Wankos and a lot of old families here, they stayed all night there. And I know Grandma charged 50 cents and they took care of the horse and fed them. So, you know, and Lois Wineco told me that. And then when Paul Sylvester died, his heirs sent papers to me that he'd had charts of his bills, and whenever he'd stayed there, he'd written it down, and she sent me copies of all that. So that was great. Obviously, I love genealogy, and I loved Western history. So, and then my parents lived in town until 1941, and they bought this house, and this was the original Matthews house. Matthews bought it from Samuel Wade in 1894, but the house wasn't here. And he started the house in 1897 and finished it in 1901. So when I was researching, I decided to do my grandmother's history at the library, which she knows. I spent 2 years there with the newspapers downstairs every day, except Sundays maybe, but other than that. And I decided I was curious about Matthews because he was an original settler, and he was one of the first people into Montrose, the first 100 families. And Mother told me he was the mayor, but I went to the library and there was nothing on him. There still isn't, you guys, it's right here. But at any rate, I decided if I'm researching my family, I might as well research him at the same time, because he was in the paper all the time. But he bought this, as I said, in 1894. Samuel Wade was ill and he moved to Washington. But he put the streets in Paonia. He put the lights in Paonia. He built, which has always confused me. And then when he moved in 1916, he had cattle, and he wanted to be closer to Escalante, so this house stayed in the Matthews family till 1943. It was 43 when my parents bought it. But the town, for whatever reason, moved the park. So I don't know about it was given to the people of Paonia forever and ever. That's a little touchy. But so was Erickson Springs, actually. So Daddy, because he was born at Bardeen, took us every Sunday from Memorial Day on. My grandfather was buried in Somerset. We'd go to the cemetery, and then we'd go on a picnic. And the dam wasn't there then, you guys. We just went up the Muddy, or up Kevlar. And probably my first memories of the town itself were you don't remember, you know, I was 8 when we left the town, but, I mean, to move here, but probably the way of life. You know, all your friends lived next door in the block. I was thinking the other day, hobos came a lot then. And they'd knock at the door and Mother would put food out on the porch and give them a broom and they'd sweep the sidewalk. You know, I look back and think families were united. People cared about each other. I remember when the Union fruit burned down, every man in town was out fighting it. And I remembered that because there were big boxes flying over the house because it was right up here where they parked those. The Union fruit was right where they park all those trailers and things. And that's where you took your fruit. But I drove the tractor up when I was 8 and I'd take the fruit up, you know. So, and that was common. It was common even to drive. I remember I was 12 and I'd take Mother shopping. And the policeman knew it, the chief of police knew it, he didn't care. You know, you were a fun kid. But growing up here was beautiful. It really was. And as I said, we went in the mountains every Sunday. And Daddy showed us every tree and every bush and every flower, you know, so I'm so grateful for that. Because I don't know, it was a family. Families were so important. And everybody, I guess most everybody was from someplace else. I remember Daddy sold tractors and he said, you never do anything but shake a man's hand. You don't need a contract. And we did have an awfully lot of foreigners here. But I was so used to accents because Daddy always had somebody here. And when my husband and I got married, we lived for the first 2 years with a family from Italy in Utah. And it just happened to be they happened to have a apartment for rent, and we rented it. And I remember she said once, you never mentioned my accent. And I thought, what accent? And that's the truth. You know, people were from everywhere. And I don't prejudice you didn't know because there wasn't any. So it was a beautiful way to grow up. Mm-hmm. It really was. In fact, almost every day you're saying, thank you, Grandfather, especially with what's going on in the world. So mm-hmm. We had 4 grocery stores. We had a Penny's and a Safeway. In fact, my husband asked me to marry him in front of Safeway store. Mother went in the store and we were out in the car. I thought, how romantic can you get? But growing up in a small town was beautiful. And you knew everybody. I can't imagine being more blessed than growing up here. And needless to say, I love the mountains. I swear I love every tree because that's how we were brought up. And you helped everybody. You know, when my dad was killed, I remember we had the funeral in the Christian church because it was the biggest church. And when we came out the door, the street was full of people. And we got letters about people he'd helped that we knew nothing about. I still have tons of letters that we knew nothing about. He didn't ever tell, but he was like everybody else. People helped each other. And I know I'm making it sound rosy, but it really was. If they needed help, they were at your house and you helped them, and if you needed help, I guess you went to their house. It was a beautiful way of growing up, it really was. I think that the town cared very much about the town. And personally, I like what they've done in Crested Butte. And I'd love to see bike trails here. Mostly because We need the tourism, obviously. But you've got to remember, Christmas, there was a tree in town. And every store decorated. And I can remember being a little girl, and I loved to go look in Kern's Jewelry. There was a jewelry store as well. And because I loved to look at the jewels in the store, little memories, you know. But every store decorated their windows. And then they planted the trees, and then they didn't want to take care of the trees. So Delta's trees were planted at the same time. But Delta has tall trees. We pulled all ours out. And what I would like to see is, I would love to see them build bike trails, because that's Cresta Butte. We went over there year before last. We had to park 4 blocks from Main Street, you guys. And it was bikers everywhere. Cresta Butte has nothing to offer in the summer but bikers. It was jammed. And if the town is growing well, I think now. I like the people that are coming in. Not that I think it was ever terribly bad, but I wish we'd decorate our stores. I wish we'd paint them different colors like Cresta Butte did, and we put flowers out. I think we need to care more about it, and people did care. I mean, we had lights that went across the street all the way at Christmas. 4th of July was a tremendous celebration. I couldn't fault the town at all when I was growing up. And neither did my dad. Was in the council. That just everybody worked together. And I don't think there were divided units. What happened with that Trump sign never would have happened. And had you put up a no trespassing sign, you would have been run out of the valley. But unfortunately, today you have to. Because even our attorney says you've got to post the land. We do have everything in conservancy. So thank God for that. Even the river land's all in conservancy. So I'm grateful for that. But we had to post it because the attorneys say if you don't post it and someone goes down there and gets hurt, even if they're not invited on the land, they can sue you. So, strong disadvantage. But we've got, everything's automatically watered now, and water rights, of course, we have the best in the valley because we have Samuel Way's water rights, which is great. But we share water. I remember someone was stealing water, and Daddy went to their house and said, you don't need to take it, just tell me you need it. And that was the end of that, but that's how it was. And I know I'm sounding like it's all rosy, but it was. It really was. We never heard our parents argue, and my 2 sisters would tell you that, ever. But it was a different lifestyle, too, for men and women. So, well, we played hide and seek. We played jump rope. We used to tie the jump rope on. There was a gate, a big white gate. We tied the jump rope on, and the gate, and played jump rope. We chased fireflies at night, and mostly played hide and seek. We did that. In the daytime, we played hopscotch, and that was it. We went to school. We all, when we moved here, Nancy Roth lived in the next block, and the kids were always down in the big front yard, and there were tons of fireflies, which I haven't seen in years. Makes me sad because I loved them. And how we played hide and seek with them, I don't know, but we did. So, but that was mostly it, was playing hide and seek. And in the summer, we tried to con Daddy into let us sleep in the barn on the hay. And that was usually very little time, but I remember once too, there were foxes down in the field, and there was one that was a cross between a doggy and a fox, and he was wild, and Daddy trapped him, and he reached down and petted him, and the doggy followed him home. So we had the doggy until Mother I never knew what happened to the doggy, but Mother made Daddy give it away because it laid across my sisters who were babies. And when they were taking a nap, it'd come and lay across them, and she was sure it'd go wild. But it wasn't. It was a lovely doggy. But I'll never forget it because all he did was reach down and pet it, and that silly dog fox followed him home. So we had him for two years, I think. I never quite forgave my mother because we loved that doggy. I loved that doggy. My sisters were too little. But Mother was convinced it would revert to the wild. So it didn't. And Daddy gave it to someone. One of the neighbors had a skunk, but he made not smell. So we used to go down and play with the skunk too. We had a very different childhood, you guys. But you went to school, you were expected to do well, and you did, you know. In a way, that's probably was a disadvantage because we were expected to get A's in school, and we all did. And we never were patted on the back for it because we were expected to. And unfortunately, I did that with my children. And, you know, I remember grounding Paul once for 6 weeks because he got a B because he was getting A's and he got a B. And I look back and think, what was I doing? But the history of the town is really fascinating. If you think of all the early settlers and what they did, Henry Roberts was, I remember, he was a good friend of Daddy's, and he was in here in 1881. So, and Daddy wasn't born until 1909, but everybody knew everybody. And again, I know I'm making it sound rosy, but it really was. I have no bad memories of growing up at all, none. I learned Paul Revere's Ride in the 5th grade. So they had me go to all the grades in school and say Paul Revere's Ride because there were 18 verses. And so Mrs. Sukkel was a teacher and her sister was a nurse. So she gave me a book that was Cherry Ames Student Nurse. So I decided I wanted to be a nurse. And I got a 4-year scholarship to CU School of Nursing. And I went to a PRN meeting in Delta, and you've got to remember it was a different time, you guys. There was I'm sure they'll leave this out, but one of the nurses mentioned a man's privates, and I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to be like that. So I turned down the scholarship. My parents weren't happy, but I didn't know what to do then, so in the meantime, the police chief called me up and said, there are 2 FBI agents that want to talk to you. And, you know, I mean, the FBI, I knew nothing about the FBI. But anyway, I went down and talked to them, and they hired me. And I was 17. And so I went to George Washington University for a year and worked for the FBI there. Then I transferred back. Well, I didn't transfer, actually, because I wasn't used to the humidity, and the only time I'd been out of Paonia was at 16, because my uncle, Daddy had gone to engineering school in Kansas City, and with his brother, Uncle Fred, and Daddy said he couldn't see the sky, so he came home. Well, Uncle Fred decided I needed to get out of Paonia because maybe I'd been to Grand Junction on band tournaments, and that was it. And so they took me back to Kansas City for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. And I remember he told me a PIE truck carried pies, and I believed him. You know, if he said it, it was so. But he took me in the first museum I'd ever been in. It was William Rockwell Nelson Museum of Art. I never forgot it because it was unique, and I love art, and of course I ended up marrying 2 architects, so it must have had an influence on me. But at any rate, it was, I got a master's degree, and actually I didn't know when I was a junior in high school, we had a teacher, Mr. Martin, who was an engineer, and they were out of work then, and he was teaching, and he went around telling us what we should do. So he said, you need to be a psychiatrist. So I thought, well, I guess I'll go into psychology since nursing's out. And actually I got a master's in organizational psychology, which today it's totally different than it was then. And of course then I didn't work because Greek women don't work, and I married a Greek. So his mother, God love him, said to my husband, I had a really good job, and which is why we lived with Teresa and Vic, because it was close. And my mother-in-law looked at him and said, what is wrong with you? Can't you support your wife? So that was the end of my work. And also I had tried for 2 years to get pregnant and couldn't, and they'd done everything to do. And the doctor finally said, well, maybe you need to quit your job, and I didn't. I didn't work again until, I worked 18 years before I came here, so it was in the 80s. And then I worked as the head of victim witness, and I handled sexual and physical abuse of children for 18 years, and then last 5 years I picked up murder and domestic violence where the children were involved. And we had, in the meantime, I brought the children out here every summer. I'd take them out of school a week before Memorial Day, and then take them back a week before school started. So the kids really grew up here. And Andrew bought the ranch. My sisters and I were left the ranch. And he bought my 2 sisters out, and I just turned my share over to him. So it's all back in order now, and it's safe, and it's secure, and you can't ask for more. You really can't. And we hope it's a haven. That's the purpose of it. And it seems to be. So you never quite know who's here. But I know lots of times in the summer when we have that 4th of July thing, we've had as many as 90 people here.
Oh, wow.
And some of them I didn't know. One summer, 3 summers ago, oh my gosh, these 2 little kids came up, because you've probably seen the tents all over. And we have 2 showers outside, and 5 potties I know, and there's 7 potties last year. But the 2 little kids came up and said, where's our mommy? And I thought, oh my God, I don't even know who they belong to. And then one of them said to the other, maybe she's in our tent, and they ran off, and I was, thank you. So we don't always know. We've had Quaker families here, which were wonderful, really wonderful. So that's really how it's set up. So I never really know who's going to be here, but somebody is.
Yeah.
So the only thing I ever remember is we lived still in town, so it had to be Depression years, because I was born in 1934. So, and Mother said, we're having steak tonight, but don't tell anybody. And that made a tremendous impression on me, so Daddy must have killed a deer. But everybody did, you guys. When they needed meat, they went out and shot a deer. Mrs. Kanzler, I remember, who's up the Muddy. Well, she's not up the Muddy. She's, you know the house, if you're going up toward the dam that's got a Coke machine on the porch? She built that. And we always stopped there. And, you know, I have tremendous memories. Most of my memories are in that area, because we stopped there all the time, and she always had ice cream. So, as a kid, you remember that. But I don't know, the whole system was different then. That's what you did on Sundays. You went to church, and then you went up in the mountains. And Depression, I know that, and I started to tell you about her. She shot the game warden in the rear end with saltpeter. And it's Ron Rogers, probably have to leave that out too. But he came on her property, and he said we only went on her property. She had a gorgeous, do you remember the barn? The hippies tore it down and used it for firewood, because she had one who was a niece, and she got mad at her. And so this again is not for publishing. We had an attorney in town we called Buckumtooth because he kept bucking his teeth out when he walked down the street. I guess they were false. So all the kids called him Buckumtooth. He was Buckumtooth was on the street. Well, he rented it to hippies and they burned the barn down because they needed firewood. And that was when they first came here and you called them hippies. I hate that word, but at any rate, the barn had a big sign on it and it says, no fishing, no hunting, no nothing. And she let anybody in to fish and hunt that she liked. And so, of course, the game warden went in and he said he's going to keep people from fishing in the river behind her house. And she told him to leave and he didn't, so she shot him with saltpeter. Nothing ever came of it, but you know, to the local people, it was the laugh of the year. My husband called her his eternal flame. The last time I saw her, we stopped there. She was reading Time magazine. She was 93. So, the people were like that. I think it was because they endured, and like I said, you could sit out on your front porch, and if you saw 10 cars, you were really lucky. But in town, that's one thing we did, and everybody else did too. On Saturday night, Daddy would go in the pool hall. He didn't smoke and he didn't drink, but he'd talk to his friends. And he'd go in the pool hall and visit with his friends. And Mother and us kids would sit in the car, and people would come by, and we'd all visit. So usually we sat in the back seat, Mother visited. But that was what you did on Saturday night. And you had to be lucky to find a parking place, because everybody came to the movies on Friday and Saturday night. Movies, I remember that. We went every Saturday morning. Gail Morrill, who lived up the street, we were on Box Elder. That was the house they bought. And he took us to a movie, which was a nickel, and it was Tarzan every Saturday night. And for a penny, you could buy Old Maids. That was a sack of Old Maids. So we did that on Saturdays. And Saturday night, that's what we did. We always went uptown and sat in the car. And the mother talked to people that everybody went by the cars talking. But you'd have to be lucky to find a parking place because everybody went to town on Saturday. Today, if they need a nail, they head for town. You know, and do I mind the lifestyle? I wouldn't want to. Mother had an old washing machine. By the way, there's an antique washer around there, you guys, that my son bought a couple of weeks ago. I've never seen anything like it. But she had a regular washer that you put through the wringer, you know, you put clothes through the wringer. And she made her own soap. She wouldn't let us come off the porch. She made it down there. And we weren't allowed to come off the porch because she used lye in the soap, I guess. It was different too. We had cows, and when they brought the bull for the cows, we weren't allowed off the porch either. So, you know, lifestyle was completely different. I remember when I was dating, I was 16 before I was allowed to date. I had to be home at 10. At 10 o'clock, the porch light went on and off. And in 5 minutes after I wasn't in the house, it went on and stayed on. I was grounded for 6 weeks. So that never happened. When that porch light went on and off, I was in the house. But I remember one night, I won't tell you who the policeman was, but I was with a boy from Hotchkiss that I was engaged to for a while. He stole a watermelon from someone's field, and we took it up to where it used to be the tennis court. Now they have whatever it is they run there with their bike. They're not bikes, they use those, what did they call them?
Skate park?
Skateboards, yeah. It's up by the park. And the policeman came up and had watermelon with us. Told us to keep the radio down. Another night, dances, we went to dances. I was allowed to go to dances, but they were out at 2 o'clock, and they were always out at Bell Creek. And so I remember there was the boy I was with, and again, you weren't kissing these guys goodnight. You had fun. We had fun. And my cousin was here, and there were 2 of us and 3 boys, and we had a 5-pound box of chocolates, and we played ditch 'em with the policeman. And when he caught us, we'd eat chocolates, and when we caught him, we'd eat chocolates. We did that till 5 in the morning. I thought, holy hell for that. But it was different. It was just different. When I think of playing ditch 'em with the policeman, but we did.
What is that? What's that?
We'd run around and hide from him, and when he found us, we ate chocolates, and when we found him, he'd hide and we'd eat chocolates.
Okay, that's amazing.
It was, the policeman knew all of us anyway. There was not a youth they didn't know. So, and like I said, it was the policeman that I ended up in the FBI, and I still don't know how that happened. I did what was called carry through mail. There were 7 people that ever saw it, and nobody could talk to me, and I couldn't talk to anybody. So that was somewhat a disadvantage, but I loved it. And I was under Hoover, and I can say nothing but great things about him. I got an award, which was 1 in 15,000, I found out. And I had to go down to the director's office, and I thought, oh my God, I haven't talked to anybody, I haven't done anything, I haven't told anybody anything. Because I was number 6 of 7 that ever saw that, and that shouldn't be any either problem. But I remember they said, you have to go to the director, and I thought, oh my God, I was there so scared of my life. Kids all have pictures because they took my pictures with him. But he loved America. He cared about America. And all that trash that came out after he died was monstrous. Because I worked in Salt Lake 5 years. And then I came home and worked for California Oil for 6 months before I got married. But again, the times were different because my roommate got married in Salt Lake, and I was still with the FBI. And it was, I think back and think, it was just a different time. My husband was an architect there that I married. But after my roommate got married, I didn't want to stay there, and I thought, if I go home, I'm safe. I wouldn't do anything wrong. So, of course, I didn't. I was home. But it was probably, you could say, we had a dictatorship. But then I raised my kids in a dictatorship. So whatever Daddy said went. And it was a different time. But I'm glad I was raised during that time because it really helped. It was really, if Daddy said it, that's the way it was. You don't drink, you don't smoke, so you didn't. And never did he ever hit us, ever, ever, ever. And he didn't, I told you the only time I ever heard him swear was at the tractor. And he didn't know I was around, or it wouldn't have happened then.